Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is the daily review of the Ukrainian front. So friends, the first autumn month has reached its middle. At the same time, no lull is visible on the front yet. The battles remain fierce, since everyone understands that in just about a month, all the greenery will be gone. And that will make any advance much more difficult. We will discuss and look at all of this in today's video. But before we begin, as always, I sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. As you know, by subscribing, you greatly help the channel's development. And if you're watching these videos not for the first time but are still not subscribed, please do so. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. Now to the Mykolaiv region. Here we only have the Kinburn Spit, and there are no changes. The armed forces of Ukraine, although training amphibious landings at bases in Ochakiv, are still not daring to take real action. For the Russian guys here on the Spit, it remains steadily tough, but they've been in this situation for several years, since the terrain here is open, narrow, and completely exposed to drones. Moving between positions is very difficult, and sometimes even impossible, since dozens of drones are in the air, constantly and regularly tracking any movement. At the same time, the guys are always on alert, because the threat of a landing attempt on the Spit is real. Moving on, in the Kherson region, no news. Airstrikes are being carried out, and that's about it. Meaning neither the Russian side nor the AFU has enough forces here for any large-scale operations, especially for crossings to the opposite bank. That's why no one is even trying. Moreover, I'll tell you this. Earlier there were attempts to fight over the islands, but now even those have stopped. Everyone just sits in their positions, with only aviation, artillery, and drones working. The situation is completely different in the Zaporizhia region. Here, the fighting is unfolding over a key Ukrainian fortified area in the town of Stepnohirsk. This is truly a key stronghold, because beyond it, there are almost 9 kilometers of open ground with no settlements, and if Russian forces take this urban-type settlement, they will be able to use it as a base for building up resources, from which the Russian army will then push north, eventually driving the AFU back those very 9 kilometers. They understand this, which is why they are constantly sending reinforcements here. But the Russian drones keep striking them. In general, the battles here are very tough. As for the nearby village of Primorsk, everything is stuck there, and no advance has been achieved yet. But as I've said before, the key here is still Stepnohirsk, so the main effort is concentrated on it, and the fighting is already taking place in the central part of the settlement. All right, let's move on. Now to the Dnipropetrovsk region, where the pace is truly impressive. Let's move north. I'll just add a couple of remarks about the Zaporizhia sector, specifically about Orikhiv and Huliai-Pola. In general, it's quiet there. And while near Orikhiv we should not expect any activation soon, the sector, in front of Huliai-Pol, will definitely become active, because to the north, fighters of the Vostok group are advancing successfully. As a result, within 2 or 3 months, Huliai-Pol risks being squeezed from 2 sides. Now, what's happening in the Dnipropetrovsk region? Novopavlivka has come under full Russian control. And yesterday, there were reports that fighting had already begun for the next village, Kalinivske. Slightly further up, battles have also started for the village of Berezov. Some rushed to report that the village had already fallen fully under Russian control, but that is not true. Fighting continues there. By local standards, compared to surrounding villages, Berezov is not small. Nevertheless, since Russian troops have already entered it and the fighting is ongoing, confirmed by both AFU and pro-Russian sources, the capture of the village is just a matter of time. And the capture of Berezov will quickly lead to a push toward Stepov, which will mean nothing less than the beginning of a blockade of Velika Novosilka from the south. Also today, news came that yet another settlement in the Dnipropetrovsk region came under Russian control, namely Olhivske. Let's now move closer to Velika Novosilka. The key battles here are unfolding in the forest. This forest is not very large in size, about 4 kilometers by 3 kilometers, but it is essentially the key to Velika Novosilka. It allows for a strong defensive position and for building up forces. And while there is still greenery, it allows troops to remain relatively hidden. It is also important to understand that as long as the forest remains under AFU control, they can always attempt a counterattack to retake Novosilivka. That is why taking this forest is necessary, not only for the subsequent battle for Velika Novosilka, but also to protect Novosilivka from counterattacks. Overall, the Dnipropetrovsk region in September has been very encouraging. As we predicted at the end of August, the Dnipropetrovsk region will rank second in terms of advance speed after Donetsk by the end of September. Who would have thought? Moving on, in the Novopavlivka sector, the Russian army is trying to move from Orikhiv toward the highway to Novopavlivka. They have taken several tree lines but haven't reached the highway itself yet. In the Pokrovsk direction, on the western flank, Russian troops are finishing clearing the urban-type settlement of Udakny. The last AFU positions were observed on the extreme western houses. As far as I know, they were destroyed, so within the settlement there are no AFU fighters left. Alive ones, I mean. Although maybe a couple are still hiding in basements somewhere, but this no longer affects the overall situation. As for the further prospects after the capture of Udakny, it is difficult to say since there is still a powerful AFU fortified area to the north, the Pokrovsk mine. This is the largest mine in Ukraine, which once produced very high-quality coal, by the way. And until this fortified area is taken, this entire sector remains under their control. As for Pokrovsk itself, I see questions coming up from time to time. A Ukrainian source has acknowledged Russian control over Zverov. Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups tried to infiltrate the city itself in order to cause panic and break down the city's defenses, but their plan failed. At the moment, there are no massive assault battles inside the city. However, there is progress near Mirnograd. Over the past day, Russian forces advanced 1.5 kilometers toward the village of Moskovskoye. A few days earlier, they had already reached Balagan. In other words, they pulled the front line closer here, and now, I think, they will try to hold on to these settlements. News is also coming from the settlements of Vladimirovka, Shakhovoye, and Sofiyivka. Reports indicate that Russian forces are developing their offensive towards Sofiyivka, while also attacking Ukrainian positions near Shakhovoye and Vladimirovka. Currently, these three settlements remain under Ukrainian control, but the situation may change in the coming days. On the Dobropillya sector, there is also good news. Russian units have resumed their attacks and achieved notable progress toward the village of Kolodezh-Veseloye. Further east, a small area has turned into a grey zone. We are waiting for video confirmation from here, since this sector is considered very important and promising. On the Konstantinovka axis, I told you yesterday that fighting had begun inside the Yagodka gardening cooperative, which is already within the city limits. But you know, there's a very interesting situation drawn by enemy cartographers. This, by the way, is a Ukrainian map, showing us the Siversk direction and the Kremen forests. According to this map, practically the entire forest is under Russian control. In fact, on their map, Ukrainian forces are shown as controlling only a small edge near the river, and that's all. Because near Yampol it is no longer considered part of the Kremen forest. And as you can see, they also marked something interesting north of Siversk, as if the city is already blocked from that side. Very curious, because even Russian cartographers don't have such information. So we'll be watching closely to see what's really happening here. Now regarding Kupyansk, yesterday video footage appeared confirming Russian positions near the city hospital. Therefore, all the stories spread by certain bloggers, we won't point fingers, claiming that all Russian advances in Kupyansk are lies, can be dismissed, since objective control footage tells a completely different story. On the Krasny Liman axis, news came that Russian forces had cleared out the pocket between Shandrigolovo and Derilovo. There is also information that Shandrigolovo has effectively fallen fully under Russian control. Recall that earlier reports said most of Shandrigolovo was under Russian control, with fighting still ongoing on the western outskirts. Today, however, reports suggest the entire settlement is now in Russian hands. In the coming days, we may get video evidence or official confirmation to update the maps. There was also confirmation from the village of Sredny. This settlement has fully passed under Russian control, and Russian forces expanded their control zone by 3 kilometers west of it. Everything indicates that supply routes to Shandrigolovo have been completely cut off, and the settlement will soon fall under Russian control as well. Russian troops are also advancing toward the village of Stavki. Reports now indicate that fighting has begun on the northern outskirts of that settlement. The latest video evidence we received was from this point, where Russian forward positions were recorded, with reports confirming attacks on Ukrainian positions near Stavki. And today, again, reports suggest positional fighting is taking place on the northern outskirts. It is possible that in the coming days, we will see a further expansion of Russian control here. All of this points to Russian troops moving toward the Ukrainian supply road, leading to Slavyansk. The route runs in this direction, and if Russian forces succeed in physically cutting it off, then the entire Ukrainian grouping in Slavyansk, along with the one in Siversk, will face a critical situation. However, Ukraine's saving factor here is the Seversky Donets River, which runs along this area and could serve as a natural barrier that may slow down the Russian advance. That's the current situation on the battlefield for today. Now let's briefly move to the political agenda. Security guarantees for Ukraine, currently being discussed, are unlikely to work, since no one in the West is eager to go to war with Russia. This was stated by Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. According to him, the idea behind such guarantees is to deter Russia from launching a new attack, with guarantor states deploying troops to defend Ukraine. If we provide Ukraine with security guarantees, we are effectively saying we might go to war against Russia, and I don't find that convincing or credible. Whoever wants to fight Russia can start right now. But I don't see anyone willing, he said. The US will not impose the tough sanctions against Russia promised by Trump, since his demands for NATO to completely abandon Russian oil are unrealistic, reports the New York Times. Currently, Slovakia and Hungary officially purchase Russian energy. Turkey buys Russian resources and re-exports them to Europe under Turkish labels. A large share of European countries buy Turkish and Indian energy in this way. Under current realities, abandoning all of this at once is practically impossible without triggering an explosive recession across the Eurozone, which is already partly in recession and partly in stagnation. Last night in Kiev region, there was an explosion of ammunition inside a railway train near the village of Kalinovka. At the time of the incident, a passenger train traveling from Kharkiv to Przemysl was moving along the same route nearby. The blast damaged the overhead contact line, forcing the train to make an emergency stop. Passengers were evacuated into the nearest forest strip. The authorities did not officially confirm an ammunition detonation, but admitted railway damage near Boyarka station, which disrupted many train routes. Bankova, the Ukrainian president's office, will likely try to blame Russian spies, but most probably the detonation happened because Ukraine is being supplied with defective equipment. Shells that sometimes misfire, sometimes explode right inside the mortar or gun barrel, and so on. One of these high-quality shells exploded inside the railway carriage. Add negligence and corruption on top of that. Someone may have already sold part of the shipment, and this was a way to cover the tracks of missing evidence. Russia has increased drone production ninefold, reports the New York Times. The article notes the explosive growth of Russian UAVs and admits Ukraine is unable to cope with the new scale of the threat. In 2025 alone, over 34,000 strike drones and loitering munitions were used against Ukraine. By mobilizing its industry, Russia boosted production 9 times. Analysts estimate that by 2026, Russia may be able to produce up to 60,000 strike drones annually. Russian regions and private companies are heavily involved in UAV manufacturing. Cooperation with Iran and China, exchanging technologies and components, has played a major role. NATO will strengthen its eastern borders after Russian drones violated its airspace, writes Bloomberg. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte announced that following Russian UAV incursions into Polish airspace, the alliance is launching Operation Eastern Sentinel. The plan involves a new defense model, integrating forces and eliminating gaps in the protection of Eastern NATO members. The decision came 2 days after NATO, for the first time since the beginning of the conflict, shot down a Russian drone. Rutte said the violations were systematic. Allies condemned Moscow's reckless behavior. Poland requested additional air defense systems and counter-drone technologies. Germany pledged to step up air patrols, while France will deploy 3 Rafale fighters to protect Polish skies. Fitch has downgraded France's credit rating. The agency cut France's rating from AA to AA+, citing political instability and rising public debt. This is now the lowest rating among major agencies, just 6 notches above so-called junk status. The replacement of 3 governments in 1 year and the budget vote failure highlighted deep political division in France. Fitch believes it is unlikely that France will reduce its deficit to 3% of GDP by 2029. The deficit is expected to remain above 5% in 2026-27. Investors are losing confidence. French bond yields have risen, and the premium over German bonds has nearly doubled. Moody's and S&P had previously also downgraded France. Fitch reaffirmed its economic forecasts, predicting French GDP growth of 0.6% in 2025, 0.9% in 2026, and 1.2% in 2027. A letter from President Donald George Trump to all NATO countries and the world. I am ready to impose serious sanctions against Russia when all NATO countries agree and begin to do the same, and when all NATO members stop buying Russian oil. As you know, NATO's commitment to victory has been far from 100%, and some countries' purchases of Russian oil have been shocking. This severely weakens your negotiating position and leverage over Russia. In any case, I am ready to start when you are ready. Just tell me when. I believe that this, combined with NATO imposing tariffs of 50, 100% on China as a group, with their removal only after the Russia-Ukraine conflict ends, would greatly help bring this deadly but senseless war to an end. China has strong influence and even power over Russia, and such tariffs would break it down. This is not Trump's war. It would never have started if I were president. This is Biden's and Zelensky's war. I am only here to help stop it and save thousands of lives of both Russians and Ukrainians. Just last week, 7,118 people died. Madness. If NATO does what I say, the war will quickly end and all these lives will be saved. Otherwise, you are simply wasting my time, as well as the time, energy, and money of the United States. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Donald George Trump, President of the United States of America. In London, the largest march against illegal migration took place, reports Reuters. It was one of the biggest far-right rallies in UK history. Around 110,000 supporters of anti-migrant activist Tommy Robinson joined the Unite with the Kingdom demonstration. At the same time, a counter-protest called Stand Up to Racism gathered around 5,000 participants. Police, who deployed 1,600 officers, faced violence and reported the first arrests. The march capped a tense summer marked by protests near hotels housing migrants. Participants carried British, English, American and Israeli flags, chanted slogans against Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and demanded that migrants be sent home. Elon Musk voiced his support for the demonstrators in an online address, calling for the UK government to be replaced. Immigration has moved to the top of Britain's political agenda, overshadowing economic concerns. Since the beginning of the year, more than 28,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel.